I showed that video in an effort to talk about rhythm, but I kind of failed to put the whole idea together and then my thought sort of was that rhythm isn't always in time. In that video, you couldn't hear the sound, but it was sort of a music track that I created using a looper. So there's a rhythm to it, but nothing really happens in time. So instead of trying to go off on that, I'm just going to use rhythm as a way to sort of talk about mostly some music-related projects. So I'm just going to basically share some of my favorite projects that I've done. And along with that, I'm going to include some sort of observations and thoughts about design or about the work. As a designer, you're going to be the sort of annoying person at dinner that's always, commenting on the typography of the menu or, the signage or packaging. But that's kind of a good thing. It's because you're constantly observing. And that's primarily, I think, what designers do. You need to observe, whether you're traveling, looking at Pinterest or whatever, and then file these ideas away so you can use them later. And I've got 3 examples of exactly that. Has anyone here put together a model before? Only a few? Well, this is a model tree, and I'm just sort of showing you this because you can't quite see it too well in this photo, but I had this orange model tree pinned to the wall over my monitor for years, knowing I was going to use it for some sort of a project. And I ended up doing this piece for Flat Stock, which is basically a gig poster convention that happens around the world. We went to the one in Austin for about 12 years. We did a bunch of those. So a bunch of different objects that represented, how to make posters, some famous sort of gig poster artists and elements that are often used in posters. I had seen Deborah Butterfield's work in a few places. I don't remember exactly where I saw it when I was working on a Wilco poster. And the sort of folded metal and all sort of is what inspired this piece for Wilco. I didn't do an object or an animal or anything. I just sort of applied that sort of look to the typography. This was for Indianapolis. There's a few elements in there that kind of represent Indianapolis. This thrice poster was kind of one of my favorites. It was inspired by a painting I saw in San Juan. It was sort of a detailed oil painting of a beautiful tree, and it had literally limbs, arms and legs sort of hanging in it. So I did this sort of graphic interpretation of it, and of course set the tree on fire. It's funny, it's one of my favorites, but one of the things that always strikes me now is there's this hole right here, where I think I should have put one more thing. So fire appears a lot in kind of a lot of the posters I've done, and I kind of blame this on Thomas Scott. I was working on a Wilco poster, actually the first one, and I was playing with this lyric about "You're not my typewriter." And this is not the poster design, but this was essentially the idea I was sort of toying with, using the sort of classic no symbol on the typewriter. And it was very static and kind of dull. So I shared it with my friend Thomas, and he said, well, set it on fire. That always works. So I set it on fire, and it was much more dynamic and a lot more interesting. If you don't know Thomas, he's a good friend of mine and a brilliant designer. So a few more examples of fire in posters. Generally, this one just got a little fire on the gas tank. And this was the most recent use of fire for this poster commemorating what would have been Sam Rivers' 100th birthday. I think this was about 2012, and I was starting to get into collage. After designing so many posters in these very graphic, in a very graphic sense, I kind of liked the sort of happy accidents that happened with collage. So I just sort of cut some things out of some travel magazines we had around the office, photographed this collage, added type to it, and then made a manual separation in Photoshop. And these are all screen prints for the most part. And I had the guy with the hat you see there. There were a few other pieces from that I had to cut out and saved. So I ended up using that for this poster for flat stock, and adapted this to a custom type to a banner. And that piece down there was for the badges. And one more collage piece, again, just sort of, this one I think was sort of a combination of actually, I think the photos were all kind of cut together from magazines and a couple of pieces that were laid in digitally. This is a poster for Ghost Train Orchestra. They were doing the music of Moondog. He was sort of an eccentric American composer, lived in New York, I think from the 40s into the early 70s. And they called him the Viking of 6th Avenue because he actually wore this sort of Viking helmet and carried a spear for a while. So again, this one is collage, but it's more of a digital collage. And they liked this poster so much that Ghost Train Orchestra worked with Kronos Quartet to record some Moondog material and put out a record. And I got to do the record cover. Changed it up a little bit. I can't remember the reason why, but they didn't want to have the horns on the cover. I just can't remember now exactly why they didn't want that. So there was another hat that he wore that kind of looked like this. That's the back cover. And it was a double album. That's the inside gatefold. On the other end of the production spectrum, this is a CD package I did for a band I was in, I don't know, a long time ago, MK Ultra. And we didn't have any money for packaging. So we had CDs duplicated, but we didn't buy any packaging. So I came up with a special fold that would hold the CD. And we just did rubber stamps, and we just sat around and stamped these. We didn't do a bunch of them. They were just really used for promotion. So being a short run, that kind of worked out. And it was pretty fun. And this is, I just got straight pieces of paper. And this is how the fold works. And it makes a nice little CD package. So this is the band that I'm currently playing in, Tinnitus Rex. And we went into a studio and recorded some stuff. When I actually recorded it myself and did all the mixing. And when it was time to make the cover, we didn't really have a title because everything we do is instrumental and improvisation. So there's really no song titles. And I think it was in February, and I saw an ad for, it was a steak that had been filleted and then opened up and looked like a butterfly. Actually, it was supposed to look like a heart. So the name Heart Meat kind of came from that. Because the music that we do is very raw in a sense. Some of it's kind of pretty, some of it's kind of ugly. But I also kind of felt like when you're improvising, you're always kind of playing from the heart. You're not just following, sheet music or a pattern. So that's kind of where the idea for this cover came from. And then we did a few samples of CDs, and this was the same fold, but using stickers to apply the graphics. And I think it's important as a designer to play and experiment, do some things that are sort of out of your comfort zone, or push things, that within your comfort zone, sort of to their edges. So we were screen printing, obviously, in the studio, and I decided I wanted to screen print a guitar. So I bought this body, I forgot where from, primed it, sanded it, and started printing on it. And actually, this first layer is from that Wilco poster you saw earlier. So I just used random films that we kind of had around the studio, burned screens, and sort of took my time printing this. And this is how the body ended up. Again, sort of collage. So again, a combination of screen printing and some spray paint. There's some curves on the Stratocaster you just can't print because it's not flat, at least not the way that we print. And that's the finished piece. And that led to me doing one for a friend and the owner over at 1010 Brewing. And again, using graphics that we had done for their packaging. Do y'all know Julio Lima? Anyone? A few of you? A few years ago, he organized an art show with designers. There's a group of designers he referred to as the Elite Hacks. And he asked us all to make a piece of fine art for this show. So I was at lunch somewhere, I can't remember, and I had this idea of kind of what I wanted to do. And he had a pretty big space. So instead of doing a piece of flat art, I wanted to make a sculpture. And I had not seen this guy's work yet, but I'm using it as an example. I love this guy's stuff. His name is Georges Rouse. He paints these interior spaces, and it looks kind of interesting, but from one point of view, it looks like this. And I had seen, I think, David Carson do this with a typographic treatment, like in a room. So I had the same idea. I wanted to do basically just a bunch of, lumber. So I went into his studio that Saturday morning, the day of the show, with a bunch of 1x2s, a couple boxes of screws, and a saw and a drill, and just started making this thing. So from one point of view, you could actually see this bomb in it, if you can kind of see it in the middle there. But from another point of view, it kind of disappears. Then there was a projection on it, so you could see the bomb sort of in the shadow on the wall. That was just really fun. And it was a moment where I kind of felt like I'm not saying this was a good piece, but I kind of understood what it was kind of like to be a fine artist, where you just go in and you make something, and the process is all it's about, and it doesn't really matter if anyone liked the end result, because you enjoy the process. I often approach my own music that way. So these are, I'm going to get into a few things that are not necessarily music related. This one kind of indirectly, the film High Fidelity. We did a bunch of cult classic movie posters for Enzian, and this was probably one of my favorites. And it's designed to look like the spines of albums on a shelf. And I tried to really keep the color breakdowns very simple, because we screen printed this, and it's, for us and our setup, it's pretty fine detail. So I tried to keep the color breaks pretty simple so that if things were out of register, it wouldn't, look too bad. Another interesting thing I think about this is if you turn the poster on its side and read the type on the spine, it is the opening monologue from the film. I'm including this one because I really love simple solutions. This poster for Kill Bill, I just typeset Kill Bill Volume 1 because of this, the swords. I just sliced it up and rearranged basically just two pieces. Because Kill and Bill are so similar, I just switched the two middle pieces. You can still kind of read it, but it's also kind of jumbled up, which I kind of love. And it was set in Japan, and, blood. But simple. There's a guy, Josh Martin, some of you may or may not know, who's been doing this uncomfortable brunch for a few years. He was hosting it at home. Then he did some at Will's Pub. He's currently hosting Uncomfortable Brunch at Enzian. I think it's once a month. And they basically show a uncomfortable film and serve brunch. So this was a screening of Nymphomaniac from one of my favorite directors, Lars von Trier, that took place at the Nook. And I had several ideas for this, so I ended up printing 5 posters, but kept them one color, so they're sort of simple and easy to knock out. So they screened Volume 1 and Volume 2. And this one, again, it's sort of collage in a way. But again, another really strange film from this one from David Lynch, Eraserhead. And again, just a fun sort of one color solution. At Lure, we do actually a lot of branding. So I'm going to include just one sample of, a brand that I worked on that I really enjoyed. It was for a restaurant called Dovecote downtown. I think they just recently closed. That thing in the top there, that is a dovecote. It's essentially a decorative birdhouse for pigeons. This was a take on a modern sort of French brasserie. So we referenced all this kind of Art Nouveau, these Art Nouveau graphics. This is where the logo sort of ended up, and there were a few variations of it. And I thought it was kind of fun to fit the feather in where the D and the C crossed. Business card and some postcards that they used for delivering the check. Designed this plate, which I don't think they ever produced. They did end up putting the logo on the knife, which was kind of cute. But my favorite piece out of this, weirdly, was this coaster. Looked really pretty, letterpressed on that. And one of mine and probably our favorite things, at Lure is being able to share. We've had a lot of interns come through over the years, and we've done a lot of workshops. And there's Vic at one of our most recent workshops. And that's what I got.
All right, we have time for Q&A.
Hannah.
I have a question about the poster with the stacked albums.
Yes.
How many colors? I think probably not everybody in here
Oh.
has done silk screening.
Yep.
And I just want to know how many colors, how many screens you
You
have.
know, and I thought about actually including the color separations for that very reason. I didn't do it. It's 4 colors. So, and that's when I said I would try to keep the color breakdown pretty simple. We try to, when we're screen printing, we try to print maybe 2 colors, sometimes 3, 4 once in a while. But that was 4-color process. So cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. There were a few screens in there, but not too many. Most of it was sort of solid color. If there was a screen of a color, it sat on top of a solid. And it just helped, if things were out of register, it sort of looked fairly clean. But yeah, just 4 colors.
When you're working on like branding projects, how many logo variations per brand?
There was a guy, I think it might have been Stefan Sagmeister, who said you should only present 1. But we don't do that. I think if you're Stefan Sagmeister, you can probably get away with that. And I think there was a story about the guy who did the next logo for Steve Jobs. He charged him $100,000, and I think presented him, maybe it was $1 million, presented him 1 logo. Again, we don't do that. We usually tell a client that we'll present a minimum of 5 design directions. Usually when we're doing a branding project, we take the creative brief, we all pitch in on logo designs. Logos are just so hard to do. But I would say we usually will present 10 to 20 variations. Some of those might not be completely different ideas, but a variation on a theme. But I would think that that's about average, 10 to 20 for us. When you say it's about right? Mm-hmm. And you say wasting time? Yeah, often it is. You feel like you wasted time when you do 20 and they pick 1. Well, okay.
You mentioned that you were singing Matz with your album.
Yes.
What software dog you use for that?
Logic. Yep. And that's, I find that really fun and therapeutic. It's another, creative outlet. Playing is one thing, but I enjoy recording, and I've recorded a lot of my own stuff just, at home. I love it. It's fun.
With the 10, 20 logos, how far do you take that design? Is it just the logo, or do you do some of the extra side pieces?
Usually in a first presentation, we present logos just in black and white, and usually isolated. If there is real need to show something in color, because sometimes it's part of the idea, we'll show it. Or if you really need to see a logo applied somewhere to sort of give it some context, we'll do that. But usually it's just black and white and isolated.
What do you tend to gravitate towards for creative inspiration?
You know, like I was in the beginning, I talked about sort of observing. I don't know, I might take kind of an obtuse approach. I mean, like to pick a model tree and go, I'm going to use that idea one day is maybe kind of weird, but it's a tough thing to kind of nail down. I will sometimes, refer, look at other work. It's a tough thing to, in a way, sometimes to kind of police yourself not to reference things too closely. So if I'm looking at other design work, I'm trying to find another point of view as opposed to an actual design I want to use. But sometimes those inspirations are kind of out of the blue. A lot of times from travel, looking at art. Again, like that sculpture was sort of an inspiration that I was able to apply to that typography. So just cataloging a bunch of things in my head. Not a great answer, but it's a hard thing to pin down.
So your slide, I saw a bunch of sketches for like roughs and stuff like that. Are you ever so set on an idea that you go straight into Illustrator or Photoshop?
I am guilty of not really pursuing a bunch of ideas. I often come up with one idea and just finish it. That's how I usually work. When we're don't laugh at me. Sarah knows. But that is, especially if I'm doing a poster or something like that, it's usually that first idea is the thing I kind of run with. Sometimes there's not a lot of time, so I'll just sort of run with that first idea. But sometimes that gut feeling of that first idea is sort of where I end up going.
In which part of your creative process you apply the set it on fire kind of?
Oh, set it on fire? Usually only in gig posters. I mean, I can't really set things on fire for most of our clients. I mean, if it just suits the mood of the band or the music, fire is a good solution. Thomas is right.
I'm just curious, how do you feel about some of the AI tools that are entering the design space?
That's tough. I haven't played with them yet, like in Illustrator. From what I've seen, I mean, there's a whole. I don't know specifically about the ones that are like built into, Illustrator and Photoshop yet. Like I said, I haven't really played with them. They may become very useful. I hope they don't become too much of a crutch. The way even stock images have become kind of a crutch. In the AI space, there's obviously issues with copyright infringement. I don't know how that's really going to get resolved. But I was talking with someone recently who's using AI for comping, for concepts. And it was working great for him. He had some idea about, these fruits, like a lemon that was screaming with like a giant mouth. And instead of trying to draw this, he put it in AI and got an amazing image that he used for a comp. But from there, I think his plan is to hire a photographer or illustrator and actually create a piece. But it made a fantastic looking comp. So there's certainly a use for it. I will see where it goes.
So this is kind of related to today's game of rhythm. Every time I walk into your shop, I feel like it's quiet. So I think you probably have headphones on. But I know each one of you loves music. And I know Sarah put together the 20th anniversary
Playlist? Yep.
Playlist. So my question is, do you always listen to separate things quietly? Or do you ever use music in the room to inspire you all to do the same thing? I know you're in.
Well, normally there is music playing through the stereo. oftentimes it's some playlist that I've played 20 times or 100 times, and they all put their, yeah, and particularly Paul is sick of it. So there's usually music in the office, but there are times people will put in, their AirPods and listen to a podcast or listen to their own music. But there is usually music going in the space.
So you find that it kind of gets you on the same vibe and creating something together? Or?
It's funny, we often are designing, even though we're in that open space, we're often designing in isolation. We share a lot of ideas. We're usually working on a separate project. And if we've got a question about where something's going, we'll usually sometimes share it over messaging rather than actually getting up and talking. It's kind of ridiculous, but it is easy to click the image and pull it up on your screen and have a discussion about it without interrupting anyone else in the space. There are certainly times where we get up and actually look at each other's screens and discuss things, but a lot of times we are kind of working on our own projects. So you're not trying to necessarily create a vibe for the whole space.
On that note, why do you divide the projects between creative and board?
It's usually whoever's kind of got some time to take something on. If we have designed, a logo for someone, and whoever designed that piece, they usually kind of take that job on. But from there, and we also each have clients that we focus on. So when those projects come in, they immediately come to whoever's working on them. So it's kind of organic.
How do you work in, or how do you balance play when you have like a strict deadline or very quick turnaround time or something?
Well, sometimes there isn't time, to do that. And I think basically you sort of find some lulls, or you create some time to do some of that. Like even when I worked on that guitar, it took weeks because I would burn a screen, print a color, and then let it sit for a day or two. And then you kind of come back to it because you're sort of working on it little bits at a time between projects. So you make time for it, or just wait for an opening.
Kind of bouncing off of Joe's earlier question about sketching. I'm surprised that that you go to that one idea pretty straightforward, when a lot of your work seems to be conceptual in a lot of ways, whether it's the Maniac posters or the academic posters or whatever. They seem to be highly idea-driven or highly conceptual. So are you a sketcher before that? How do you manifest?
I don't do it as much as I used to, but I used to do a sketch for almost everything. But it would be like a little tiny thumbnail. I'm not great at drawing like some people, but it would just be a tiny thumbnail, almost like that one I showed of the sculpture. It'd be that loose usually, to try to get an idea of proportion and see if these pieces would sort of fit. But yeah, there's usually like the high fidelity one. I'm pretty sure that was the first idea.
So how do you get to your ideas then? Is it just the point that they just complete you? Or how do you develop those concepts and ideas?
It's so tough. They do just kind of come to you. Watch the movie, listen to the band, like especially with gig posters. It's kind of easy in a way sometimes to solve those just by finding a lyric that you can turn into a visual. And we do that with a lot of those. And sometimes it might seem kind of overly simplistic to do that, but I really like the idea that if someone is a fan of the band and they see that visual and they immediately get the lyric that's in it, there's immediate connection there. And I think that's pretty powerful.
So then,
I mean, the high fidelity thing, the guy had a massive record collection, so you put some fucking records on the poster, Like it wasn't like a big idea. So then sometimes it's the execution, what do you do with the execution to kind of make it interesting? And I thought that including the monologue really kind of made that piece much more interesting.
So then for the benefit of a lot of the students that are in the audience, one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about Dovecoat
Yep.
logo is that you had the actual object there. How important is research to your process and ideation and kind of going through from start to finish?
Completely, it's totally important, yeah. We do it every time. I mean, a lot of times the ideas are built in. Sometimes it's in the creative brief and it's in the research. You'll find something like, oh, that's it. And sometimes the most obvious answer, sometimes it's the best one because it is obvious. And then it's how do you then execute that?
How do you navigate working with a client that doesn't get your concept, doesn't like your idea, and getting that?
We vent to each other. Honestly, there was kind of a time I would probably fight more. Clients don't want to hear anymore. They seem to kind of just want what they want. So I'll usually try to push back some and explain why this idea works and this one, doesn't. But that's an ongoing thing. And when I retire, I'll be glad to not deal with that anymore.
You mentioned that creative brief for clients. Is that how you kind of develop like a brand awareness or like just go further more than that, like research like what they would, what they're asking for?
Sort of how do we develop a creative brief? And yeah. Well, we try to ask, we try to get a good input meeting with the client, find out who they're talking to, what they want to say, and what they're trying to accomplish. And then we'll kind of go off on our own from there and do some research and find, other points of view that sort of match that. Again, it's a little more analytical than, where does inspiration come from? Because you can actually research specific things. But even that is a little esoteric in a way.
I have a questionnaire that I created on ChatGPT that I gave to clients to try to have answers, many detailed answers, a really solid idea before I go back and do the.
We've definitely done that kind of thing too. Get as much info as you can. Again, if you get a lot of info from a client, the answer is probably in there somewhere. Right. Diane agrees.
How do you break up your time between the different projects? You have like a set schedule?
No, there's no real set schedule. It's really just everything's deadline driven. I'm one of those designers. When we were talking about, rhythm was the theme for today, and one of the things I kind of thought about was rhythm equals procrastination. Like no rhythm. A lot of designers do procrastinate, and I often do. And I let it sit. I let it stew. I think about it when I'm driving. I think about it, whatever. So eventually this idea will come, and then it's just execute. But it's in terms of scheduling time, it's really just all deadline driven. Deal with the deadline, in front of you.
How long do you usually have for a phone?
It really varies. Sometimes it's due tomorrow. On a new project, we try to get 2 to 3 weeks to get an initial design to a client, and that will vary. But that's what we usually ask for, like 2 to 3 weeks.
What's your collaboration with the copywriters? Who determines what goes on the cover? Are you determining what you want it to say, or is it like?
Well, it depends. There are sometimes we actually do some of our own writing in-house if it's not, a big project that doesn't involve body copy or, sort of high idea stuff. But we do work with copywriters. And that's actually been a really important thing to me, I think, throughout my career, is working with writers. Diane's one of them. Great writer that we've done a lot of projects with. But no, the writers have been very, very important. I mean, you can design something, but the messaging is obviously crucial.
That's what I was wondering, for a poster cover. And so the idea is that you can.
Posters, usually it's straight sort of design. We're not really dealing with, copywriting if it's like a gig poster or even the movie poster. But if we're doing, a brochure or an ad or we're obviously working with writers. And oftentimes they'll come up with visual ideas that we then have to, sort of interpret. So it's very collaborative with writers.
Do you consider yourself an artist or a designer first?
An artist? That's sort of an age-old debate. I kind of think no, in a way. I mean, what we do is artistic in a sense, but it's definitely commercial. Like I said, when I did that sculpture, I kind of felt like, it might not be good art, but that felt like art because I just went in and made this thing and had this idea, and it just didn't matter what anyone thought of it. I enjoyed making it, I enjoyed the process, and that's kind of art. And I'm almost that way even about my music. I'll just make music for myself, and if anyone listens to it or likes it, or whatever. The process is kind of what it's about. But with design, you're making something for a client. So it's definitely, it's a different animal.
Do you think there's anything about your approach to design that carries into your music? Totally.
I was thinking about that, and the collage thing kind of does. Because even if I'm writing music, sometimes I'll just have a loose idea of a riff, I'll just record it, and then just start building things on top of it and just see where it goes. There isn't an idea, there isn't, it's not completely planned out, like where the choruses are going to be and where there's going to be a break. I'll just sort of let it happen. So, and a lot of my designs kind of flow that way. There's an idea, I just sort of go down that road and sort of see where it leads me. So there is, I think, a definite sort of connection there for me. Some people I think are much more organized, more analytical, and have a plan, and like Paul.
I want to ask you about Lure itself, and can you raise your hand if you're part of Lure, John, Paul, and Sarah? Just kind of to recognize the people who are talking about there. So John's back there, I guess that has one. And then we have to kind of remind us, we've spent some time with Lure. And
She's squatted at Lure.
Yeah. So, Lure, as I mentioned before, has been around since the 1990s. And during that time, a lot of places have come and gone. People have shifted to like more in-house work or whatever. So can you speak a little bit about the longevity of Lure and what you maybe credit that longevity?
Volume. No, kidding. It's honestly, it's keep the overhead low. I think so many places probably get overextended, and price themselves out of projects. It's basically just, honestly, it's kind of just keeping our expenses kind of low. That's really kind of it. And it's all been pretty much word of mouth. There's been a few times where things sort of slowed down. We really tried to go pitch work, and it wasn't always successful. You meet people that you just don't click with, or you'll start a project and it just kind of goes south because they don't really get us. So it's been mostly word of mouth. I think people that do end up coming to work with us kind of get who we are and what we do. Not all of them, but I think that's been kind of it for us, keeping it cheap.
How often do you spend your time trying to keep yourself motivated with new techniques or growing as a designer, or versus when you just know how to do what you do and then you just kind of?
For me, it's kind of, I know how to do what I do and I kind of stick with that. Usually it's kind of out of necessity. We're running into it right now with a client that we're having to do some stuff in HTML5, and it's, but we're having to, every once in a while you just kind of have to learn some new things, but for the most part, I kind of do what I do.
What do you do in those cases when those projects aren't aligned? What happens in
Well, usually, I would say if that hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened. Usually there's a kill fee and you just finish, get out of the job. Bill them for part of your time and move on.
Kind of to follow up on that,
you mentioned earlier some pain points with clients that didn't jive with you.
Yep.
Have you ever fired a client, and what would be your advice to a small business owner or freelancer who is faced with that situation? Do you just bite the bullet and work with that person, or do you fire the client and move on to something better?
It depends. I think we have fired a couple clients over the years. And it's not like you call them up and say, you're fired. It's just, you and say, this is not working. We're going to, again, send you a bill, send you a kill fee, and we're just going to move on. A lot of times we will just kind of bite the bullet, finish the job, and sort of, they may just drift away anyway. If it didn't really go well, they may not come back. So it kind of goes both ways.
We have time for one more question.
You have any gigs coming up?
I have one coming up. This is like the end of Hot Ones. We actually have a gig coming up at Stardust. Well, that one's in January with Nicole. We have one at Stardust on December 2nd, and that's with my duo with Billy Davis. We're planning to do a live soundtrack to a film. What's it called?
The Shannon
And it was made by Dolly and
Dewey Buñuel and Salvador Dali.
like in the 20s, a silent film. And we're working on a live soundtrack for that we're hoping we can actually do at the Enzian. But that won't be till next summer. And that'll be with Tinnitus Rex. Other than that, no, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.